Dietary fat, it's a big question, right? And especially in a culture where we're told to fear fat of all kinds. Um, and I think as a health coach, one of the biggest, let's say, hurdles you have to overcome with individuals, particularly females, it seems like, is to try to open the discussion about what is fat. So I think this is a fabulous conversation. Thank you for inviting me. So dietary fat to me, and I'm approaching everything from the lens of a health coach, is fats that are present in foods such as meat products, right? You have lower amounts in nuts, seeds, and some fruits like avocados and olives. And I'm particularly interested in those fats, those dietary fats that come from natural sources, just like I just mentioned. We can talk about other sources that come from what I call unnatural or processed sources, right? But fats are, an integral part of our diet. Let's say if you've got, and you can always listen to that beautiful TED Talk from Dr. Sarah Halbach, where she beautifully explains the three macronutrients, right? The fats, the protein, and the carbohydrates. And of those three macronutrients, we know, all right, it says in the literature that carbohydrates are really non-essential. So you've got two very essential ones, protein and fat. Now, on the types of fat, right, you've got three basic ones. And I'm not a biochemist, I'm a health coach, but you've got your saturated fat, your monosaturated fat, and your polyunsaturated fat. And those range in hierarchy, right, from most stable to least stable. And something that I find always fascinating in working with individuals, coaching individuals, is they maybe don't realize or just haven't investigated enough, but every fat has actually all three of those. It's just that they have one in more majority. So let's say in a piece of steak, you have got saturated fat, mono, and poly, but the saturated fat is the one of the majority, right? And when we think about the stability, so that's what I'm interested in these days also, is why are we having so many individuals with inflammation? So saturated fat is the most stable of those three, right? And that has to do with its structure. And if we think about the structure of fats, right, saturated being the most stable, right? You've got carbon bonds, and I love it in the book from Sally Fallon and the Weston A. Price on fats. They talk about that all the carbon bonds are occupied or they're saturated, right? So that's really, really stable in that. When you drop down in the hierarchy to the monosaturated, which is something like olive oil, right? And if we understand that saturated fats, usually they can be solid, right? That is their structure there. So olive oil is something like, it can get solid if you cool it, right, in the fridge, right? But it also is in a liquid form. It's missing two of those hydrogen atoms. So it has instead two carbon bonds, and it's that little bend which makes it a little less stable, right? And then we drop down one more into the hierarchy of the polyunsaturated, right, which has two or more bonds and therefore lacks four of the hydrogen. And it's this run which becomes again much less stable, right? And there are then we get into the conversation of the omega-6 and the omega-3 here. And it is important, and where we're seeing a lot of the research is the ratio of omega-6 and omega-3. We need both of them in the body, right? So if omega-6 is a little more inflammatory, and when you cut yourself, you're really glad you have that, right? Right? Because it's going to help you with the healing process. But what we're seeing today, and we'll get to this conversation a little bit, is the polyunsaturated fats, right, from the vegetable oils, from what I call those unnaturally processed fats, right? The ratio is so much higher. I think in Sally Fallon's book, the Western Price, they talk about a really more ideal ratio might be that 1-to-1, or maybe even 2 or 3-to-1. But what we're seeing today is ratios upwards of 20-to-1, right? Of that omega-6 to omega-3 ratio. So we're going into territory which I think we're not really made for in that way. And if we go back to that idea that we need protein and fat, I like to say, and when I'm looking at how I'm helping or supporting clients of mine, is the more you can get your dietary fat from these natural sources, the better, right? And when we think about recommendations, right, again, as a health coach, I'm looking to make people find a simple solution, not make them find, help them, support them find a simple solution. So when it comes to recommendations, particularly coming from a low carbohydrate lifestyle, we're looking at this whole picture. So first we're going to start with, like, what are your goals? What are you trying? Do you have weight loss goals? Do you have weight maintenance goals? Are you insulin resistance? What is the overarching goal? And then looking at what you're consuming. So we would start first with how many carbohydrates? What is your carbohydrate tolerance, right? What is the amount that is going to be ideal for where your goals are and what you're doing, your age, all those kind of things. And then second would be getting adequate protein, right? Finding the right source of protein for you, for your skeletal muscle mass, for your activity level, again, for your age, gender, all those things. And then we start saying, okay, well, now we figured out what those two pieces of the macronutrient situation are. And then we say, how do we fortify that? How do we fat fortify that? What is the amount of dietary fat? I'm usually not working with people in the terms of a percentage. You need to have a percentage. We start, again, as I just mentioned, with the carbohydrate intake, protein intake, and then the idea of fat fortifying your meals from natural sources, right? From those coming from meats, meat products, as I said, nuts, seeds, and some fruits in there. And I can tell you the sources of dietary fat that we have in our house, right, are duck fat, tallow, lard, homemade bacon grease, right, coconut oil, olive oil. The dietary fats we do not have in our house would be those polyunsaturated or PUVAs made from seed oils, which are highly processed, right? I think Chris Kressler breaks it down. He goes through the whole process of why are seed oils making us sick, right? It is this enormous processing of those oils. And as we start to see, right, those polyunsaturated made from highly processed factories, they're just not a natural product, we see all kinds of negative impacts, whether it's impacting our mitochondria in the cell, whether it's impacting ATP, our sort of power source, signaling failures in the cells, oxidation, inflammation. So my perspective on advice or just working with people to help understand dietary fat is real simple. Can you get your dietary fat from natural sources? And can you avoid those unnatural sources, those heavily, highly processed ones?
Wow, that was an amazing explanation. So if we understand it, we've got our saturated fat, which is really stable, which means it does really well when we heat it up. It does well if it sits out, like grandma always used to have the bacon grease sitting out on the stove. That's totally fine. I made some bacon for an upcoming backpacking trip that I'm going to do. And it was lovely to just tip the tray into a little jar and save all the grease. We did that yesterday, and it's great. We use that for cooking. It's fantastic. So those natural saturated fats would be coming primarily from animals, could also be like coconut oil, the more solid fats. We have monounsaturated fats, which have that one double bond that can react with oxygen and create oxidation. So that would be olive oil. Maybe avocado is primarily kind of that monounsaturated fat. And you just need to be a little bit more careful with it, right? It will oxidize with light, heat, and air. So you just need to be careful. Then we have these polyunsaturated fats, which we do need. We just need them in tiny, tiny quantities. And we need them to be primarily omega-3, which is anti-inflammatory, and less omega-6. And we need both. You're right. Like when we get cut, we need that inflammation. Inflammation is never a bad thing, but it can go haywire if we get way too much. And so once we started, incorporating more of these vegetable oils, which ironically don't even come from vegetables, not at all. They come from seeds and nuts and all these things that we squeeze this teeny tiny amount of fat from. They're not even high fat products. And that's where the unnatural fats come in. And those are the ones we want to avoid. Do I understand that right?
Totally, totally. And again, if we think about it, you could squeeze an avocado, you could squeeze an olive. However, to get seed out of a soybean oil or corn oil, you're having to take this immense process of heating it numerous times, right? Of adding chemicals to change the color, and all those heavily processed things. And as you said, it's the ratio of omega-6 to omega-3. It's not that we don't want them at all in our body, those polyunsaturated, but we need them in that good ratio, right, for the body. And I love your explanation of, we want those things that are stable, that we can, the body responds very well to them. It seems that we're more designed for those dietary fats that are naturally made, as opposed to design for these heavily processed, heavily chemicaled products that seem to be playing havoc with so many processes in the body, right? And when we're like working with elements that we're not designed for, there's just too many things that could go wrong in a simple way.
Yeah, that's right. Wow. Well, what an amazing explanation. We're so glad we're starting off this episode with this explanation. We really appreciate that so much. Where can people go to find you and connect with you and your work?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm at square1wellness.com, and the number one, that's my website. I'm also on Twitter with the same handle, square1wellness, and on Instagram. Love to hear from anyone. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much. That was fantastic.